Okay, today I'm going to introduce you to a new tool called the Pen tool. Hopefully you've downloaded your exercise files. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open the file called PenTool Simple.jpg. I'll zoom in here. And we're going to learn how to use the pen tool by using the shapes that are available here in this JPEG. So these are going to be used as guides. The pen tool is a really important tool. It'll be used for most graphics that you'll develop in Illustrator, as well as paths that you'll create in InDesign. And in Photoshop, it's often used for masking, selections, and/or graphics. The pen tool will allow us to make selections that have sharp edges for graphic illustrations or other types of graphics that don't fit neatly into the selection tools that we already have available in Photoshop. What the pen tool does is it creates paths. And we do have a paths window. It's in the same area as our layers window. If I click on my paths window here, I'll see that there's nothing actually loaded. That's because we haven't created any paths. So let's access the pen tool. P is the shortcut key on your keyboard. If you hold your mouse down over the pen tool, you'll see there's a number of options here in Photoshop that are associated with the pen tool. But we're going to start by using just a regular pen tool. And then I want you to take a quick glance up at the settings for your pen tool. Again, that's in that horizontal bar at the top of your workspace. I want you to verify that your pen tool settings are set to path. And you shouldn't have to make any other adjustments here, but if you want to just double check, I'll be working with the exclude overlapping shapes option. And this is just how different paths will interact with one another. I think they call it path operations. Yes, they do. Path operations. Okay. Alright, so we're going to start with the easiest shape to make, which is the star. And I'll just zoom in here a little bit more so you guys can see it better. The way the pen tool works, if you take a look at my cursor right now, it has a star next to it. What the star means is that you're starting a path. Once you remember that, you're golden. It's really important that you know that, because if you ever see a star next to the pen tool but you're supposed to be continuing a path or adding to a path, this is indicating that that's not the case. You are starting a whole new path. Okay? The way it works is your pen tool will allow you to set down something called anchor points. You can set down a single anchor point by clicking one time with your mouse, and you'll see a little square appear. Now notice my square is this dark blue. Yours might be a dark gray. But that solid square means that that new anchor point is not only in existence, but also is selected. Okay? And when it's selected, you can actually move it. So if I use my arrow keys on my keyboard, I could nudge this around if it's not exactly where I want it to be. You'll notice that when you're setting down points, it's setting down points at the tip of the pen cursor that you have here. If I look at my paths window now, I'm noticing there's something called a work path there. That's because I just set down the first anchor point of a work path. Now, I'm going to follow my shape in a clockwise motion. Okay, so I'll be moving, down to the right, up to the left, and then back to the right. And we're going to work our way all the way around the star. And it's going to be pretty easy. So if I click here on the inside point, what I'll see is a blue line connecting the two anchors that I've just set down. If I go to the outside point, I can click one time and I will see another line appear. Notice again I'm getting a dark anchor point where I just set down an anchor. The other two anchor points are white. What that means is the only anchor point currently selected is the dark colored one. I'll navigate to this inside point. I'm just clicking one time. Outside point, click one time. And this shape is going to be similar to a shape that you could easily build using that polygonal lasso tool. The difference is the polygonal lasso tool will be adding a selection, and what we're building is something called a path. There's some differences to that, but it's just important that you know that they are different. I should mention, there are lots of indicators that happen with your pen tool cursor. If I hover over an anchor point and I see something like this backslash, what that means is if I click on that anchor point right now, I'll be connecting in order to continue that path. If I click on an anchor point and I see something else like a negative sign, what that means is it's going to delete the anchor point if I click on it. When I delete anchor points using the pen tool, what it does is it removes the anchor, but it doesn't create a hole in the edge. It just removes the anchor point from that side. So then you'll notice I get a straight edge if I do that. You don't need to delete any anchor points. I'm just showing you what that looks like. If you see a plus sign, that means that you're about to add an additional anchor point to a path. So your pen tool really does tell you a lot of things. Backslash means that you can click on the anchor point in order to continue the path here. So I'll continue to move clockwise around this star. I'm only adding anchor points where there are corners. And then just like with our lasso tool, I'll end up back at the first point. I'll hover over that point. If you see a circle, what that's telling you is you'll be closing your path. When you close a path, what it means is that all edges are defined. There are no holes in any of the edges. So I'm going to click one time to close my path. It's really important that you only do that when you see the circle. Okay, and now after clicking on it, I should see all of my anchor points selected. So that means if I wanted to move this path around, I could, because all anchor points are now selected. I'll also see a little thumbnail next to my work path indicating a white shape. That also means that I have a closed path. If you want your thumbnails to be larger so that you can see them better, go to the upper right corner of your Paths window. You'll find a little hamburger menu. If you click on it, you'll get a drop-down menu. And panel options will allow you to define the size of your thumbnail. So I'll choose a larger size so you guys can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I have this nice white shape. It looks pretty good. If you want to make any changes to this shape, you can do that using a particular type of path selection tool. Path selection tools are available in your toolbar just underneath your pen tool. We have a regular path selection tool, and we also have something called a direct selection tool. Notice that their shortcut keys are A, and you can click Shift A to toggle between the two. I'm going to use my direct selection tool because the direct selection tool will allow me to select individual sides or anchor points to adjust. The path selection tool will only select the entire path, meaning for this particular path, the entire star-shaped path. So I'm going to take my direct selection tool here. Again, Shift A is your shortcut key. It's the white arrow. And what I'll do is I'm going to click outside of my path, just in a blank space here. And what that does is it deselects the path. Notice that no anchor points are visible now. And if I wanted to make any adjustments, I can click on an anchor point to select it, or I could click on a side. And what will happen is I can click and drag. So you click once to select, and then hold your mouse down and drag to move. So it's kind of like 2 clicks. So if you want to move these things around, you can adjust them if they're not perfect. But it's really important that you deselect by clicking outside of the path and then reselect the individual parts that you want to edit. So that's what the direct selection tool is used for. Let's say I wanted to change an edge here. I could click on it one time, and then I could click and drag. Notice it's just allowing me to move that edge. I can't even rotate it. Okay. Once you're happy, just deselect by clicking on a blank space on your canvas. So that's a really easy path. It only has anchor points and it doesn't have any slopes. What I'll do right now, just to be safe, is I'm going to rename my work path. I want you to know that work paths are temporary. For different reasons, work paths will be deleted. If you load your path into a mask, or you load it as a selection and start using the selection, work paths are not considered permanent. They haven't been saved. So in order to save this path so I don't lose it, I'll just double click the text that says work path in my paths window, and I'll rename this shapes. Notice that this is called a save path dialog box. So until you rename your work path, it's not technically saved. I'll say OK. And now let's move on to another shape that's a little bit more complicated. So I'm going to press P. I would also just suggest that you double check that your shapes path is selected. When it's not selected, it's going to look like this. It's going to look like this dark gray. When it is selected, it'll have this light gray. And you'll also see the blue outline of the path there. So when you deselect it, that blue outline disappears. When you have it selected, it reappears. I want you to make sure that this is selected because I want you to build all 3 shapes on the same path. Okay, so I'm going to work on this ellipse. Now the ellipse is not perfect, and that's just so that we can practice making slopes or curves. So I have my pen tool here. I have my path selected. And what I'll do is I'm going to start on the left side of this ellipse. Notice I have a star, which means that I am starting a path. And to create a path, you have to, to create a sloped path, I should say, you have to use your pen tool in a different way. Instead of clicking, like we just did with the star, we're actually going to hold our mouse down. So I'm going to be directing my path around the ellipse, meaning I'm going to start on this left side, and then I'm going to work my way clockwise around the ellipse, telling it what to do. Now, to tell the path what direction to go, you actually draw a line in that direction. So from this left-hand point, what I'll be doing is telling the path to go up and to the right. Okay, but from this point, I'm only telling the path to go up. So I'm going to hold my mouse down. I'm going to eyeball center. Okay, you'll have to eyeball it, and we can move them or edit this path at the end. So don't panic if your path is a little bit different. We'll talk about editing at the end, just like we did with the star. I'm going to hold my mouse down now and drag up. All right, so these are handlebars that I'm creating. They're called Bezier handles, and they're telling the path what direction to go. We don't want our Bezier handlebars to be too tall, or they will pull our path away from our ellipse. And if they're too short, they're going to make our path really flat. So I'm going to say that the Bezier handlebars should be about 2/3 the height of my ellipse. And that looks pretty good. I'll release my mouse, And this handlebar up here that I just dragged straight up, notice I dragged up, is telling my path to go up. But the path also needs to go to the right in order to create the correct slope. So what I'll do is I'll go to the top of this ellipse, hold my mouse down, and drag to the right. And now I'm seeing my path appear in between my anchor points. So wherever I start dragging, that's going to be where my anchor point lives. Wherever I release is going to be where the end of my handlebars are. And don't panic, notice how my slope is a little bit off. We can adjust that at the end. It doesn't look bad. If it was really extreme, I might be worried, but for right now it looks okay. I would also say, if you're seeing something like this, what happened is when you created your first anchor point, you dragged down instead of up. Okay, so if this happens to you, no need to panic. What you'll have to do at the end is unwind this, and I will show you guys how to do that. Okay. Alright, so I'll continue my path here. So I've said that this path needs to move to the right. So assuming the path is continuing to the right outside of this anchor point, what my next point is going to have to tell it to do is to go down. So I'm going to navigate to the far right side of this ellipse, hold my mouse down, and I'm seeing my path appear. That is pretty close to the edge of my ellipse. Release my mouse, and that looks pretty darn good. So what we did was we dragged down, telling the path to continue a trajectory down. If you ever took geometry, what we're actually drawing are tangential lines. Or if you ever took physics, it's almost like drawing out torque. Okay, so we're heading down, and now we have to get the correct slope again, which means that we're going to have to tell the path to move to the left. So finding the lowest point on this ellipse, I'm going to hold my mouse down, drag to the left, and I'll release my mouse when I'm happy with where my path is. Now you can adjust your path up or down. I want to mention that the longer the handlebar, the further away from the anchor points the path will move. The shorter the handlebar, the flatter it gets and the closer to the anchor points. So it gets flat when the handlebars are short, more curve when the handlebars are long. Okay, and then you can go up or down to kind of adjust everything. Okay, so I just dragged from this anchor point out to the left, again telling the path to move in a leftward trajectory, and then we'll go back to the beginning. We're looking for that circle indicating that we'll be closing our path, and we're going to hold our mouse down, and don't panic, it's going to be a little jerky at the beginning. Oops. Hold our mouse down. Sorry, I held my mouse down for too long. We're going to look for that circle, hold our mouse down, drag straight up, and we're going to get that lower left quadrant as close as possible to the ellipse. I'm going to release my mouse, and now we can make adjustments. Just like the star, we're going to make adjustments using our direct selection tool. Remember that A or Shift A will allow you to access that tool. I'm going to deselect my ellipse, my elliptical path, and then I'll reselect my trouble areas. So if any of the quadrants are really looking strange, I want you to just click directly onto the blue path, and what Photoshop is going to offer you are two handlebars defining that slope. So I'll make some minor adjustments. This one probably needs to be a little shorter and at a very slight angle. Adjustments are made using this round end to the handlebar. So again, using my direct selection tool, I can click on that handlebar, I can drag out, or in, up or down, until I'm happy with my elliptical shape. You can do really, really minor adjustments, or you can do something more major. If you're seeing anything strange, like if you're having trouble and you're seeing something like this, what's happening is you dragged in the wrong direction. So the path kind of got wound up and then continued in the direction that you were creating your elliptical shape. So it's not difficult to fix these. What you want to do is click on wherever you're seeing a problem. Okay, so for me, if you're seeing a little tiny loop anywhere, click on that loop with your direct selection tool. You're going to get a handlebar. I'll click on the anchor point to get both handlebars, and then I can just drag one of these handlebars, and you can see either direction you're going to be able to unwind this. You just circle around that anchor point and then release your mouse, and you can adjust each handlebar's length individually. What you can't do is adjust the angle individually. These handlebars are what we call locked. You want things to be locked if you're building round shapes like ellipses or circles or curves. Keeping the handlebars locked together creates a really, really smooth curve. If you unlock them, what you're going to get is a point, and we don't want a point on an ellipse. Okay, so you have your ellipse created. I'm going to click outside of this. And then again, I'm going to move on to the next shape, which is slightly more complicated, this heart shape. And I'll press P to access my pen tool. And I'm going to start in the upper right corner here. This one's going to be a little bit different. You'll notice we have 2 points here, but we also have curves in between. So it's going to involve a little bit more knowledge of the tool for the pen tool, or the tools surrounding the pen tool. I'll move around the heart, and I'll set up a second anchor point about halfway down this really long slope. Now, once you get really good at the pen tool, you may not need a center point. But for us, as we're learning, you might add one. You do want to remember that you want to use as few anchor points as possible, because every anchor point has to be adjusted if you want to change your shapes. So it creates a lot more work for you as you start developing your graphics. So from the center point here, I'm again directing my path to go down and to the left. And then at this corner point, I'm again directing my path to go down and to the left. Now, what we need to do at this point is we need to redirect the handlebar. So I'm going to access a new tool. I'm going to use Option or Alt to access something called my Convert Point tool. And it's called that because it converts what would have been a curved line into a pointed line. Okay, so I'm going to open this using, or access this tool using Option or Alt, and then I'll hold my mouse down to redirect this handlebar. So I'm basically driving with both hands. I'm using the keyboard to access a tool, and then I'm using my mouse to redirect the handlebar. As I move up, I'm going to again define a point that's about halfway around the slope, and it'll be redirecting the path up and to the left. As I get to the upper left curve of this heart, I'll hold my mouse down and drag up and to the right. Again, just moving in the direction that the path needs to go. And then I'll move back down to this point. I'll drag down and to the right. Notice, this is a teeny tiny little handlebar. It does not have to be long. Okay. Now this handlebar is dragging the path down, but now the path needs to go up and to the right. So again, we need to access that convert point tool. Using Option or Alt, look for that upside down V. While continuing to hold the shortcut, I want you to use your mouse and drag this handlebar up and to the right. And you just want these handlebars on corners to kind of graze the edge of the shape. So just barely sort of hug the edge. Okay, they don't have to be very long because remember we already set up handlebars over here when we started the shape. So now I'll move back to my first point, look for that circle. I know I'm closing my path. I'm going to hold my mouse down and drag down and to the right. Now that I have my path closed, I'll press A to access my direct selection tool, click outside of the path to deselect it, and click onto the path to make adjustments. So I'm going to find that I might want to make really minor adjustments to the location of my anchor points. Sometimes if you can't get the corners to be exact, it might be that you just need to move your anchor point slightly down or slightly up, and you can kind of see what happens there when you do that. So you can click on anchor points, you can adjust the handlebars, and remember if you're seeing a funny loop, then you can unwind. The points, if these are acting a little funky, it might be that you set your points up wrong. So again, it's just like unwinding. You'll go in a different direction than it's in. And that looks pretty good. So now you've developed paths. But what do you do with paths? Well, there really are a lot of different things that you can do with these now. For one, these are saved. So you can come back and use these paths at any time. But I'll show you really quickly how you can use them. The first way that you can use paths is you can use them as selections. So let's say I really want to just paint into the star shape, or I want to paint a new star onto my canvas. What I'll do is I'll take my path selection tool, A is my shortcut key. I'm going to select that star, and I'm going to load that as a selection. If you look at the bottom of your paths window, you're going to notice that there are 7 different icons down there. And some of them are familiar. For instance, the icon for a new path is the same as a new layer, and adding a layer mask is also available here. Know that adding a layer mask is going to add it to whatever layer you actually have selected over in the Layers panel. So even though you can't see it in the Paths panel, it's going to load here. Okay? But what we're going to look at first is just a simple selection. So I've taken my path selection tool, that black arrow, I've selected my star shape, and then I'm going to find the third icon from the left at the bottom of my path window, and that's my load path as a selection. When I click on that, I should see marching ants around the star. What that means is everything inside of that selection is now selected. Remember that selections are a funny thing. They once they're loaded, there's not much that you can do with them. Okay, so what we'll do is with these marching ants, we will take a paintbrush, B is your shortcut key, choose a new color. You're going to find that I always choose magenta. And let's bring down our opacity a little bit. Notice in my layers panel, I'm actually painting onto my background layer. So when I paint while a selection is on my screen, it's going to limit the types the pixels that I can paint into. Okay. Now let's say I actually want to paint several stars. Let's deselect and let's take this star path, use my path selection tool, and let's make a duplicate. So I'm going to hold down Option or Alt if you have a PC, using my path selection tool, I'm going to hold Option, click Drag Release, and I'm going to get a second star path. I can even hit Command T or Control T, and I'll get my transform box where I can scale this, rotate it, and rearrange it. So Option or Alt, click Drag Release with your path selection, Command T to scale or rotate. And then using that path selection tool, you can select your shapes, load them as selections, and selectively paint into your layer. Command D will remove the selections. I still see my shapes because I still have them selected. So paths and layers are treated somewhat separately in our selections. So the path selection tool is selecting our paths, whereas the marching ants are selecting our pixels. So pixels live on layers, and paths live in our paths window. They're sort of separate, but they define different things for us. Alright, so let's now just select all of our paths. I'm going to take my path selection tool and I'm going to hold Shift and I'll click on all of these. I'll then use my paths window to load all of these as a selection, and I'll paint if I want to. Or I could even invert my selection using my select window, and I could paint everything outside of these. Oops, I made my brush a little too big. What if I wanted to use these as a way of creating an adjustment over my image? I'm going to go over here. I'm going to navigate to my paths. I'm going to create a duplicate of my heart shape using my Option. I think I accidentally clicked the stroke key. So if you're seeing strokes, that's what happened. At the bottom of your paths window is a stroke icon. And if you're not paying attention, I have a really sensitive trackpad. I think I accidentally clicked on it, so that's why I'm seeing these blue outlines. But if I resize something like this heart, I load it as a selection using that third icon at the bottom there. If I go back to my layers and then bring my adjustment panel forward, I could make an adjustment. And I apologize, I always sort of toggle between brightness, contrast, and hue saturation, but you could use any adjustment that you like. You don't have to use those all the time. So if I did a hue saturation adjustment, then my my selection, which were the marching ants, and my paths will be loaded into that. But I'm actually going to delete this second thumbnail here by dragging it into the trash can. And then I could use this adjustment however I see fit. And again, that shape, that heart, came from a path that was loaded as a selection. Our next demo will cover how these paths can be used for something called a vector mask. I think it'll be a little confusing to talk about it in this demo because this is just introducing tools. But in the next demonstration, I will show you how to use these paths to create very sharp masks. So what I'd like you to do is just save this as a JPEG. Remember, last name, first name, the week, and the exercise number. And that's the pen tool. We'll be using it for the rest of the semester, so I hope you practice and explore creating new types of shapes with it.